Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to another reaction video. If my voice sounds kind of off today, it is because it is. I've been dealing with some kind of cough for the past couple of days and it's wrecked my voice. It's made working more challenging, obviously made recording more challenging, compounded by the fact that I had to climb into this space today because of all of the stuff around the table, around this whole area, because this is normally our dining area and everything that used to be in the pantry, everything that used to be in the cabinets is just out of frame. So you might see little hints of it here and there, but eventually, yes, you will see pictures of the entire mess on the Instagram. Which leads me to talking about our Instagram. This is a new page, another way for us to connect with each other. Go ahead to @therapy.today. The link will be in the description below. Go ahead and follow us there. What we're reacting to today is a Law and Crime Network video covering and breaking down Morgan Geyser's appeal to be released from a mental institution that she has been in for a number of years, ever since she was committed to that institution following an attempted murder of a friend where she stabbed her friend 19 times, apparently at the behest of Slender Man. This was the Slender Man attempted killing back in 2014, I think it was, and now it's 10 years later. She has been through different treatments, different commitments throughout that time, those 10 years, and now she's petitioning to be released, saying that she feels mentally stable and able to be a part of society now. And so in this video, we'll dig into her diagnosis, some of what the Law and Crime Network says about the legal aspect of things, and if we can ever be actually sure of safety when it comes to a history of violence and a history of serious mental illness. So please like and subscribe, stay up to date with our content, and make sure you don't miss any of our videos, including ones like this, and let's dive into it.
It was a case that shocked the nation and made headlines around the world. In 2014, two preteens lured their classmate into a forest during a game of hide and seek, then stabbed her more than a dozen times, all to appease an online boogeyman called Slender Man. Nearly 10 years later, one of those girls, who is now 21 years old, is asking to be released from a mental institution.
Yeah, so let's do some math really quick and some background of the case. All right, so these stabbings occurred when she was 12 years old, and so now it's almost 10 years later. She's 21 years old. She was originally sentenced in 2018 to 40 years to this involuntary commitment after stabbing her friend 19 times. Again, like they said, apparently because she had received instructions from the Slender Man to do so. She was originally tried as an adult and found not guilty by reason of mental illness, which means that she lacked the mental capacity at the time to have the intent to commit the crime. And so her attorneys, I guess, had argued that whatever mental illness she had suffered from was actually what was responsible for the stabbings, not her intent to do so. And so we'll step into talking about her specific diagnosis, what the implications are of that, and we'll get into that more as we get into this video.
Oh, we have to hope that through age and through treatment that she's been able to deal with that, and they've been able to kind of figure out what the source of that was, and they've been able to get her right. Otherwise, they'll keep her in there, which if she's not right, she needs to be in there. We can't have her running around, but I don't know those answers, and we'll have to wait and see what the doctors say. And we have to assume that the judge will be prudent and make the right decision.
This is not the first request that she has made to be released from the treatment facility that she's been at for a while. As early as 2018, there were attempts that she made that were eventually retracted to be released early. And I don't know the history behind why those were retracted initially, but there have been therapists and doctors at that location who were treating her who have testified that she was stable, she was on meds, and they felt like she was not a risk at that time. Interestingly though, there was another psychologist at the time who was treating her who said that they did not feel comfortable signing off on her early release because as recently as a couple of weeks before that request to be released, she had heard Maggie, who was one of her hallucinations, just in the couple weeks prior. And so because of that, they didn't feel like she was ready to be released. And again, those petitions ended up being withdrawn, but it was interesting that even as early as 6 years ago at this point, she was considering trying to get released early.
2014 stabbing took place in a local park in Waukesha, Wisconsin. Prosecutors say Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier pinned down their classmate Payton Leutner. Then Morgan stabbed Payton 19 times while Anissa urged her on. Payton thankfully was able to drag herself to a nearby road and found a cyclist who called 911. Her so-called friends Morgan and Anissa were found by authorities within hours. During their interview with police, the two reportedly showed no remorse and claimed they attacked Payton to appease Slender Man, a tall, thin, faceless, and fictional character.
And so Slender Man, I think, originally came out from a video game, and so obviously she had gotten the idea of Slender Man from whatever content she was consuming, either whether it was YouTube, watching other people play, or playing herself. And the story that eventually came out was that Morgan Geyser and Anissa Weier, I think her name was, believed that Slender Man had said that they have to kill this classmate. Basically, they had to kill someone in order for Slender Man not to kill them or their family and friends. This was how they rationalized why they needed to kill her.
2018, Morgan Geyser was committed to the Wisconsin Department of Health Services for 40 years after being found guilty of attempted first-degree intentional homicide, but found not guilty by reason of mental disease. Now, through a new petition, she's seeking to be released from the state mental hospital, but with conditions.
When I was a kid, we always had like Bloody Mary, that if you said Bloody Mary in the mirror 3 times that she'd appear. You know, we always had kind of these like legends, but it never went to the, the absolute like diabolical stage that this did, in terms of that they claimed that when they killed their friend that they were having a sleepover with, that it was at the behest of Slender Man.
I spoke with criminal defense attorney and host of the Defense Diaries podcast, Bob Mata. He tells me Morgan would have to go through rigorous court-appointed evaluations to even be considered for conditional release.
That makes a lot of sense. And so what I read was that Morgan Geyser's official diagnosis is early onset schizophrenia, which schizophrenia is marked by auditory and visual hallucinations. And so that makes a lot of sense. And so what he's saying about, like, the Bloody Mary thing or Slender Man or, whatever boogeyman is in vogue at the time, it's not necessarily that, oh, she just happened to take it more seriously, or that social media or video games are worse now than they used to be, or media is worse than it used to be. I think there's a combination of factors that obviously her diagnosis of schizophrenia meant that she would have some difficulty figuring out what was real and what was not, because there were things that she was hearing or seeing that other people already were not hearing and seeing. If she happened to latch onto this figure of Slender Man, whether by playing video games or watching YouTube videos or whatever it was, that could easily be added to the hallucinations that she would normally see or hear. I have had other clients whose hallucinations have been impacted by what they consume in media, and so that became really important for them to be careful of what they consumed and making sure that they distinguish between what's real and what's not. On the other hand, too, it sounds like her schizophrenia was very serious in that she was probably getting command hallucinations, and so there are some hallucinations that, while always serious, and of course it's important to seek out professional mental help if you are seeing or hearing things that other people don't see or hear. Command hallucinations are unique in that they are actually giving commands. They can range from relatively innocuous ones to more serious ones, like telling you to kill somebody, and a lot of times there's a lot of fear associated with these command hallucinations, which is what we see in this case, where she was afraid for her life, she was afraid for her family's life, and so that made it the more palatable choice to stab her friend 19 times.
And obviously from an attorney's perspective, I immediately start looking at their age. That's always the thing that I'm looking at in terms of undeveloped minds, which at 12 years old, despite the act itself being a very adult act, their minds are just not developed. So you have that dichotomy there that's hard for the court systems and people in general to deal with. It's like, how do you deal with a couple of girls that seem to have come unhinged and, in terms of doing this to like one of their friends? And, ultimately when I heard the story, it was shocking. I was obviously very happy that the victim survived, thankfully. I mean, the way that it works is that the judge will, he'll require that she goes through some pretty heavy duty evaluations from
I think he brings up a good point. The age was definitely a factor. I think, like he talked about earlier, when we see something that we feel like belongs in the adult world, like attempted murder, it's very easy to start treating the perpetrator as if they were an adult. But I think on top of the mental illness, whatever other factors may have been going on, either with family or socially, with Morgan Geyser, there's also a level of impulsivity when it comes to adolescence that we don't think through the long-term consequences of our actions, and just the other factors ramp that up to a very dangerous degree. So let's see what he says about the kinds of evaluations that she might have to go through in order for this petition to go through and for her to be released.
Court-appointed psychologists and psychiatrists to see if she's ready. I mean, she's been working at this point for, near 10 years to try to get right. I think she was convicted in 2014, if I'm correct, and we're rolling up on 2024. So, I mean, we have to feel that the judicial side of it, that they're going to take all the measures necessary to make sure that they're not sending somebody that's continuing to be unhinged, even into her young adulthood, out into society. But again, I mean, it always depends on the doctor, and it depends on how much faith you put into psychiatry and psychology in terms of.
Psychology and psychiatry are relatively new fields. And one of the difficult things is we want it to be able to predict, because it can predict to be able to control behavior, all that kind of stuff. And in this case, we're trying to predict, is she still going to be violent? Is she still going to act out murderous commands from hallucinations that she might see or hear? I have a lot of respect for these forensic psychologists and psychiatrists who evaluate people in this kind of position, because that is a huge responsibility to either sign off saying, I think this person is ready to reintegrate into society, and that can backfire hugely if they end up hurting someone else, or saying that I don't think they're ready, and they end up staying committed for multiple decades. So that is a huge responsibility, and I don't envy them that. But that's the hardest thing, is that people are very unpredictable, and sometimes one of the greatest predictors of future violence is past violence. And so that kind of measure doesn't really help her case to be released, because she had a past instance of violence. And so one of the articles that I read actually said that back in 2018, when she had gotten stable on her meds, and she was recognizing the need for her meds in order to stay stable, and the potential consequences if she decided to discontinue her meds or stop taking them, that can be a positive sign in her favor, because medication compliance is really helpful for people with schizophrenia, staying on top of those so that the hallucinations don't come back, or that they are not as strong or not as convincing as they would normally be. Especially the legal argument for not guilty by reason of mental disease. If that disease is managed, then in theory, the crime should not occur again. Again, we don't know that for sure, and psychiatry and psychology is not 100% on something like that. And so that does become a little scary, and like I said, lots of responsibility for the people who will actually be evaluating her to present their reports to the judge who makes the final decision.
Really being able to predict what's going to happen in the future. I mean, it's unsettling, I mean, it is. It makes you feel nervous, and you just hope that the doctors that are going to be evaluating her are going to be doing a very thorough job.
Anissa Weier, who stood as lookout during the stabbing, was also committed in 2017 for her role in the attack and granted conditional release in September 2021. Anissa's conditions include being required to receive outpatient psychiatric treatment. She was subject to GPS monitoring, but that condition was waived in September. So could Anissa's release help in Morgan's case? Mata says it's possible.
Yeah, I think certainly that they'll look at it. From what I've read, she's been successful with it. She hasn't had any issues. That's obviously going to be something that will be brought up in terms of the judge deciding whether or not it's appropriate for her to be released at this point. But that sticking factor, and we don't know what the state's position is going to be with respect to it, is, again, Morgan was the one that was actually doing the deed. You know what I mean? So like that, it's an extenuating circumstance which could play against her, because it's one thing to kind of tag along with a buddy, that's your friend and peer pressure and whatever the case may be. It's another thing to be the actor, so we'll see. I mean, it certainly can't help that she seemed to be able to adapt, but as far as Morgan goes, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. And again, it's really going to boil down to, powerful evaluations have to be done. These just can't be check the boxes and like, yeah, she's good to go. I mean, in which I assume that the doctors that'll be charged with the task of evaluating will do a proper job, because they'll know if she's getting released on their word and on their evaluations, that if something goes awry, people are going to come knocking on their doors. So let's hope that they do the job properly.
Yeah, and if there's anyone who does forensic stuff, let me know in the comments, what is that like for you to sign off saying that they're either ready to be reintegrated back into society or not? Because like I said before, that's a huge responsibility either way. Even when I have clients who are thinking about hurting or killing themselves, maybe they haven't done it before, but they're just thinking about it. That leaves me with some worry for them. When they leave my office, in essence, I'm saying, okay, I feel comfortable with you leaving this office under your own power, under your own responsibility, and I'm putting the weight of my professional license behind that, saying that I trust that they're going to be okay. And if they turn out not to be okay, I have to make sure that I took the proper steps, like you said, not just checking the boxes, but doing everything properly in terms of assessing, creating a coping plan, calling people to make sure that they can be kept safe if necessary, things like that. And those are the steps professionally that I have to do to make sure, again, in this kind of inexact science, to be able to say, like, to the best of my ability, I think they're not a risk. But that also doesn't mean there's 0% risk.
This isn't the first time Geyser's defense attorneys asked the judge for conditional release. She reportedly asked the Washington County judge to be released, but withdrew those petitions in 2022 and 2023.
I think her probably, like, the most likely scenario is that her attorney looked at the evaluation, spoke with the doctors in the facility, and got because I'm sure Morgan was pushing. I mean, as soon as she heard that her girlfriend got out, she's like, well, I want to get out. What about me? What about me? And it's like, so she was probably constantly asking her attorney, when can I file? I want to file. I'm ready. And I have a feeling that based on conversations that took place regarding her progress, that they thought it in the best interest that maybe she hold off for a bit longer. I mean, that's the most logical explanation, and I think that ultimately the attorney was probably trying to set it up in a way that it will succeed, as opposed to going in and getting turned down. Because that just, it creates a bit of a stigma just mentally for anybody that's going to be looking at it moving forward, especially a judge. If the judge is going to be the one that's ultimately going to decide whether or not she's going to be released, and she'd gone in a year prior and they say she's not ready, and she was pushing it to get out, it's gonna cause that judge to take pause and be like, all right, well, what has changed that much in a year? You know what I'm saying? So I think probably they wanted to wait until it was going to be clear across the board in terms of her treaters and the providers, and them saying, look, I think she's ready. We feel very secure in that. And
yeah, and I'll say again, I'm not a professional in this regard. I didn't study forensic psychology and don't do assessments for things like this. My questions, I guess, are what kinds of things are you assessing for? Because an absence of violence does not necessarily mean that there's not going to be violence in the future. I think if she was able to integrate socially within the hospital, I think that could be an argument in her favor. I would think if she was compliant on meds, compliant with treatment, that's also helpful in making her case. But no, it's a really tough question, and I do wonder what the victim, the original victim, Payton Leutner, thinks about this situation. I'm sure she's got to be up on the news that, one of the perpetrators was released already, and that the other one, the one who actually stabbed her multiple times, is petitioning to be released. And I'm just curious what kind of memories, thoughts, and feelings that brings up for her. because I think from what I've read that she's tried to be very positive and graceful about the whole thing. But I imagine it's one thing to be those things and be very positive when you know that they're in custody rather than out back in society.
That's when they decide to run with it.
And with a judge ultimately making that decision, a scheduling conference is expected in the coming weeks.
And I'm sure, based on kind of the high profile nature of the case, that it's going to be looked at, it'll be scrutinized, and that everyone will be, dotting their I's and crossing their T's to make sure that they get it right. Because the last thing that we want is to put, an unhinged young woman out there who's still got issues, because that's like doing what she did, kind of based on things that she's seeing on social media. She was very susceptible to suggestion back then, and her mind was wandering. So, we have to hope that through age and, through treatment that she's been able to deal with that, and they've been able to kind of figure out what the source of that was, and they've been able to get her right. Otherwise, they'll keep her in there, which if she's not right, she needs to be in there. We can't have her running around, but I don't know those answers, and we'll have to wait and see what the doctors say. And we have to assume that the judge will be prudent and make the right decision.
Yeah, so very hard to say in this case. 10 years of treatment so far. And the idea of it is ostensibly not punishment either. It's not like she's being confined to the hospital as a punishment necessarily, but so that she can get better, so that she doesn't commit these acts again, and meanwhile she's in a safe place where she can't hurt herself or other people in the process of healing and recovering. But I do think there are two separate recoveries to keep track of here. One is for Morgan Geyser, the perpetrator, as well as for Payton Leutner, the victim in this case, and potentially how one person's recovery might mean a relapse or reopening old wounds for another. And that's really hard to balance, and I hope that the judge and the doctors who are considering all of this consider the impacts on Payton Leutner, on her family and friends, and people who have been affected by that criminal act so many years ago. And again, I don't want this to be a video about like, oh, social media is bad, video games are bad, we should not consume any of that stuff. I'll say again, there was a combination of factors multiplied exponentially by the early onset schizophrenia that made everything so much more volatile that she would actually act on these hallucinations, on these fears that she had, that this Slender Man was apparently talking to her and telling her that she needed to do these things. Well, everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. Please comment below. Let me know what you think about this case. This was a huge case, and I'm surprised it's actually 10 years old already, because it definitely made headlines way back when, and it looks like it's making headlines again now. In terms of as we talk about advocacy, this case was probably very difficult for people who struggle with schizophrenia to hear some of the discourse about serious mental illness, hallucinations, schizophrenia as a diagnosis, how people tend to lump in those kinds of hallucinations with danger and instability and volatility. And so I do want to emphasize that schizophrenia was one of the factors, and she had an early onset version, a very serious kind of schizophrenia that led to some of these command hallucinations that led to the attempted killing. But it's definitely a case that's worth following, definitely a case worth continuing to read about and talk about. So thank you for watching this video. Again, please like and subscribe, stay up to date with all of our content. Thank you for checking out this video. I'll see you all next time.